if you couldn't tell, we're kind of proud of her. Right? Single woman who says, I'll go to Haiti for 2 years or more, because that's what God's calling me to do. Truth is, God calls all of us to serve him, right? Sometimes it's across the ocean. Sometimes it's just across the city or across the street. Today we start a new series called Work Matters. If you work, I did a little math here. If you work 40 hours a week, I know many of you work even more, for 50 weeks a year, we'll give you 2 weeks off for vacation. That's 2,000 hours a year. And if your work career, now maybe you have many jobs, but if your work career is 40 years, that's 80,000 hours at work. Wow, no wonder I'm tired. It's a lot of time, isn't it? Do you think God has anything to say about how we spend those hours? You would think, right? Is work a four-letter word? Is work a blessing or a curse? And how does my faith interact with that? Or do I just do my faith Jesus thing on a Sunday, and then Monday I go back to the real world? Well, in this series, we want to show you from God's Word how those two go together. They go together very well and very tightly. God, indeed, does have a lot to say about that. It fits our mission, right? That we're supposed to represent Jesus in every area of our life. Our vision, we're trying to prepare and mobilize you to live out the good news in every area of your life. We kind of refer to that as your front lines ministry. Well, today's sermon is entitled The Ministry of Work. If you have a Bible, I want you to find in the Gospel of Matthew, toward the end, of that book, Matthew 25. It's the last recorded teaching of Jesus in Matthew's Gospel. And it's the parable of the sheep and the goats. And I've done some rethinking about Jesus' story here. Years ago, I thought it was just sort of him talking about, I don't know what to call it, sort of casual giving. That, at Christmas time, you throw in a few bucks in the Salvation Army red kettle, and that's it. But he's talking a lot more than just that. Why do I think that? Because we'll see, he's going to talk to us about, it shows up in eternity in terms of what we do. And so that can't be just sort of a pastime event. It's got to be more. So let's look into Matthew 25. I want to say three truths about the ministry of work. Here's the first one. If you're following along, there's a sermon outline there in your program. Let's talk about the significance of work. Why is our work so important? Why would we do a five sermon series, life lessons on this? Well, Jesus said that one day we're going to meet him, whether he comes back or we meet him in heaven. But until then, he has some work for us to do. Well, what I want to do in this story is Jesus sort of fast forwards to the very end to see what happens. What does happen? Let's look. God is going to make an eternal separation. Let me read those verses. We're jumping right into the story. It says, when the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, he'll sit on his glorious throne. And all the nations will be gathered before him. Now he's going to make a separation. He will separate the people, one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. If you drive by the farm, and look over, and oftentimes the sheep and the goats are kind of mingling together. Well, and the farmer is smart enough. He knows which is which. But here, this is an eternal separation. He will put the sheep on his right and the goats on his left. Now, this is not a question of if Jesus will do this, but when he'll do this. He says every single person, right, all the nations are going to appear before Jesus. Now, Jesus doesn't make them sheep or goats, right? They're already sheep or goats when they get there. But he divides them as he sees them. Sheep on the right hand of mercy, perhaps, and the goats on the left, on the hand of judgment. And we'll notice that there's no middle ground in between. There's no such, well, maybe I shouldn't say that. I was going to say there's no such animal as a hybrid sheep and goat. Maybe you could correct me. Have they tried to do that, and you have what would that be? Sheep and a jeep? No, I don't know. Anyway, there's no middle ground. You're either sheep or goat. Well, how he's going to not only make this eternal separation, he's going to make an eternal explanation. Why are they like this? The judge is going to explain. Now, we got to pay attention here. This is not a prescription, but a description. Prescription is something that God says he's prescribing. You got to do this. This is more a description, that is, I'm describing how things are, what they're really like. You're either a sheep or you're a goat. And judgment's going to reveal what has long been true. So we have to ask ourselves initially, which are we? Are we a sheep or are we a goat? Because there's an eternal significance. We'll see. So the dividing line is pretty obvious. Well, let's look at how does Jesus know? What's the basis? How does he divide? What's the criteria? Let's look. Let's talk about the service of work. Because Jesus is going to say, your work matters because that's a lot of times how we serve other people. Your job, either right there or the effects of it, serves people all over the place. And he's going to say and reveal, well, let's look and see how that benefits other people. How does that serve other people? The sheep we're going to see is that there's a willingness to serve. Serve who? Serve God and others. Let me read. Then the king will say to those on the right, the sheep, come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. And now he's going to give some examples. For I was hungry, you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me. Well, then the righteous will answer him, Lord, I don't know if we remember that. When did we see you hungry and feed you? Or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in? Or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick in prison and go to visit you? We weren't really keeping track. When did all this happen? The king will reply, truly, I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. The least of these brothers or sisters. In that setting right there with the Christian disciples, but all of Christians, Christ followers. And so how we treat them is also sort of how we're treating Jesus, because Jesus identifies so much with them. Well, let me go back. We went through those verses rather quickly. Let's go back and see the sheep's willingness, where God has put them in certain situations and their willingness to just serve God and other people. Okay, let's look at this one. I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. The Lord identifies with those humans who are hungry, and he chooses, in a sense, to be hungry. And he waits in the hungry man or woman or child. So God is served by those who work in agriculture, wholesale or retail foods. They work in kitchens and restaurants, food transportation. When the roll is finally called, millions of people will be so glad to hear God say, you know, I saw you at work. I was hungry, and you fed me. Let's keep going. I was thirsty. You gave me something to drink. Jesus is just talking about basic necessities, right? Food, now drink. But the people and God himself are served by all who give water, right? You have a private water service in your home, or purifying water, or you well drilling, or any plumbers in the house. There you go. You're going to serve God and other people. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I think this goes to, again, providing physical necessities. Not only clothing, but shelter. Shelter is sort of a way to clothe and protect people, right? So maybe you work in textiles. You sell clothing. You make clothing. You build and repair buildings. You sell real estate or insurance. You're on the fire department or police department or military, and you protect those properties and people. You're a mother dressing your baby, dressing Jesus. You can do that. Let's keep going. I was sick, and you looked after me. Sick, another human health need, both perhaps physically and emotionally or mentally. So Jesus says, I was sick, and I saw you. You work in the medical profession, don't you? You're a counselor. You sell health insurance. You make or sell medicine. You minister in so many different industries in the health-related field. You're a nursing home administrator. I'm pointing to Nathan Pearson. You work in a hospital. I was sick. You looked after me. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. These are for people who are seeking some communion and communication and connection, and I feel like a stranger, and I need somebody to help me. You work for the telephone company. You deliver mail. You work in the media. What else do I have in here? I wrote a note on here. You're on social media, so you better be careful what you put on there. Last one. I was in prison, and you visited me. Here's the social outcasts, those literally in a physical prison. But those folks, there's other folks who are sort of mentally and physically held hostage by other things too. By ignorance or fear or exploitation. So you work in social services. You work in education. You work in law, or politics, or government. I was an orphan in Haiti, and you came to minister to me. There we go. Well, I apologize if we missed your job. There's thousands of occupations, aren't there? But you got a flavor for where Jesus says that's what sheep do. They serve. They serve God and other people. So much so that it's going to be reflected, even in eternity. Well, I was reading this and I thought, well, wait a minute. Do only sheep work? Don't goats work too? We don't call them sheep and goats. But don't you have non-Christians that work at your place? You do, right? So it's not that they don't work. There's something deeper than just sort of going through the motions of work. This teaching talks about why. What's the aim? What is the person really all about? Are they seeking to serve God and other people, or are they just in it for themselves? Well, let's look. Jesus is going to talk about the goats now. He talked about the sheep. Then I will say to those on his left, goats, depart from me. You're cursed into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. Why? For I was hungry and you gave me nothing to eat. I was thirsty, you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, you didn't invite me in. I needed clothes, you didn't clothe me. I was sick and in prison, and you didn't look after me. They also will answer, oh, Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or stranger, needing clothes, or sick or in prison, didn't help you? Sort of the implication is, well, man, if we knew it was you, we would have done something. Same kind of answer. He will reply, truly I tell you, whatever you did not do for one of the least of these, you didn't do for me. It's interesting. This is not, I was sick and you healed me. I was in prison and you liberated me. These are not big miracle things happening here. These are just little, everyday kind of things. So are we a sheep or are we a goat? Protestant reformer. I'll save that one. Sorry. So God's not just interested in that, well, we go to work and we do it. He's interested, like all things, he's always interested in our heart. Why are we doing what we're doing? Well, because there's significance in our work, eternal significance. And it has to do with service, who we're serving and why. And in further sermons, we'll talk more about that, of why we do that and how we do that. But let me finish with this. The so what of work. That is, like it says there, so what? What do we do with Jesus' teaching? How do we apply this? You know, good sermons always have application. And more than just a general, may God apply these truths to our hearts. I don't have a clue how it works, but hopefully you will. You know, no. Let's get a little more specific. So let me give you three so whats. Here's the first one. We are accountable for our work. Now, you and I are free to live life as we please, but just know that at the end, we have to give an account. Right? The judgment is going to await everybody, no exceptions. So no matter what our job or work or whatever occupation, career is, God's going to hold us accountable to that. I think that, I guess it could be a negative, but I think that's a positive. That is, when I go to work tomorrow or whenever our next day is, I realize that God is watching. And every task or project, big or small, I can do this for God. And he's watching how I do it, and my attitude and my consistency and my, just everything. And I'm going to be accountable to God for that. So that makes a big difference. Second, I want to make clear, we are not saved by our works. We should not make this passage teach that, because it doesn't. But when you first read it, it kind of sounds like that, doesn't it? Like, oh, well, if I'm nice to my neighbor and give some spare change to the homeless guy on the street, I just go right to heaven. That's the social gospel. That's not what Jesus is talking about. No. No one has ever been saved by their works. Old Testament saints were saved by faith. New Testament saints saved by faith. You and I, we're saved by faith. Whenever you're reading something in the Bible and you're not all quite sure, now what does this mean? A good thing is to try and find in the Bible where it talks about that same thing. I wonder if God says anything else about that subject, right? Let the Bible interpret the Bible so that you're not just sort of making things up or think, well, I'll just think this. Well, no, what else does God say? Well, God says so much more, not only about our work, but how we're saved, right? So I don't have it on the screen here, but let me just read Ephesians 2, 8, 9, and 10. It says, for by grace you've been saved through faith. It's not of ourselves. It's a gift of God, not by works that no one can boast. None of us will get to heaven and say, yep, I did it myself. I worked hard all my life, and here I am. I deserve to be in heaven. Don't stand next to me when you're saying that to God. That's not the right answer. No, we're there by God's grace. But it's interesting. The very next verse says this. For we are God's workmanship, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do. We're not saved by our works, but it certainly is a demonstration, like Jesus painted the picture, that we are sheep and not goats. It shows up. And frankly, most of us, a big part of our waking hours in the day are spent at work. So it would be natural that our Christian faith would be demonstrated there. I was going to say this earlier, and now it's here in my notes. I saw this good little quote from Protestant reformer Martin Luther. It says, God does not need our good works, but our neighbor does. Right? We're not working our way to heaven. Jesus has already accomplished that. But because we know and love Jesus, it overflows in our life. Then this last point, real quickly. We've already kind of talked about that. But we serve God through our work. Right? What we do. The sheep, and they weren't keeping track. Right? They were kind of surprised. Oh, that was you, Jesus? I was serving you? Wow. For me, that was just an overflow of my life and my faith. I wasn't keeping score. And the goats, I didn't want to, we didn't know, if we knew that was you, we would have done something differently, but I didn't care. It didn't matter to me. It's interesting that individualism in this passage surprises us. At least it surprises me. Jesus says, even one of the least of these. So that means, you know that little thing you do at work where your boss or your coworker never even sees or acknowledges? Jesus does. He sees that. And he rewards that and blesses. That one, now obviously there's more than one, but even that one little thing. God, I want to serve you. Well, let's get to your part here as we conclude. Take out your connection card there and your next steps. Let's talk about application and supplication. Application is, what am I going to do? God, what do you want me to do as a result of this? And supplication is prayer. That is, I want my church family to pray about something. It doesn't have to just be a workplace prayer. It could be other needs as well, obviously. But each week we want to uplift you in prayer. Why are we talking about this again? Because work matters, doesn't it? There's significance to it. There's service, a way to serve God. And God's watching that and blessing that. And he's not only sent you there to make money, but it's also a ministry. And even if you're retired, you could retire from your paycheck, but you never really retire from work, do you? There's always things to do. So we want to join you in that. I'm going to welcome the worship team to come play while we take your offering. We'll receive that offering and your connection cards, and we'll be blessed as we do that. Thanks for your response.